Eggs and Issues, a monthly business forum bringing timely economic discussion to the region for 35 years. Presented by the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce. Presenting sponsors, Bank of America and Martins Point Healthcare. Cooperating sponsors, First Light, WEX, and Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. Community Corner sponsor, Goral Palmer. Reception sponsors, Clark Insurance, KeyBank, and Veril. Tomorrow's Leaders and Entrepreneurs sponsors, Springborn Staffing Center and AAA Northern New England. Media partners, News Radio WGAN, The Forecaster, WMTW News 8, Maine Biz, with production support provided by Headlight. Special community partners, Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, Spectrum Healthcare Partners, the University of Southern Maine, and Southern Maine Community College. And now, please welcome Portland Community Chamber President, Jim Cohen.
Good morning and welcome to Eggs and Issues, the monthly business breakfast of the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce. My name is Jim Cohen, once again coming to you live from my living room studio in North Deering, Maine. I'm a partner with the Veril Law Firm. I'm honored to serve as the volunteer president of the board of the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank all of you once again for joining us safely this morning for Eggs and Issues. Today marks a full year of virtual Eggs and Issues, which I'm sure none of us thought would be possible a year ago. Yet we have forged ahead with great programs and amazing guests, including today's guest, U.S. Senator Susan Collins, who we are thrilled to have with us. More on that in a moment. First, the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce is very pleased to announce our virtual annual event, Imagine Portland, which will take place in June. Under more normal circumstances, we would have welcomed 1,000 of our closest friends to Brick South in January for an evening of camaraderie and celebration. Alas, the pandemic has prevented us from doing so and proceeding with that event, but the show will go on. Instead, on June 9th, from noon to 1 p.m., we will be hosting our virtual version of Imagine Portland. At this event, we will take time to celebrate the resiliency of our business community and honor the individuals and organizations who have made a difference to the Portland region through social responsibility, business adaptability, community partnership, creative entrepreneurship, and tireless advocacy. You will be receiving an email this afternoon with registration information, as well as a link to cast your vote for our 5 award categories. We are looking forward to hosting everyone on June 9th. One other public service announcement. As you no doubt have heard previously from the Chamber, there will be an election this June for Portland's Charter Commission, which is basically a constitutional convention for our city government. I had the honor of serving on the last Charter Commission that concluded in 2010, which resulted in Portland voters being allowed to directly elect their mayor. Now, candidates are lining up to earn the right to participate in this year's Charter Commission. The Chamber looks forward to engaging with the public on this important topic through programming, but in the meantime, we are encouraging Portlanders interested in serving on the commission to step up and participate. The entire process will last about a year and have meetings, most likely every other week. It is a critical process that demands the active participation of thoughtful, open-minded residents. If you would like more information about serving, I would be happy to talk with you personally. Just reach out to me through the Chamber. Now, I would like to take a moment to once again thank all of our sponsors of Eggs and Issues who make this event possible, whether in person or virtual. First and foremost, our presenting sponsors, Bank of America and Martins Point Healthcare. I also want to thank our other generous sponsors. Cooperating sponsor, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. Reception sponsors, Clark Insurance, KeyBank, and Veril. Our coffee sponsor, Skowhegan Savings Bank. Our remote parking sponsor, Vitalius Real Estate Group. Our community corner sponsor, Goral Palmer. And our Tomorrow's Leaders and Entrepreneur sponsor, AAA Northern New England. A special thank you to our media sponsors, The Forecaster, WGAN, WMTW Maine CW, and MaineBiz. And a thank you to our FMI sponsor, the Portland Public Library. And of course, we continue to miss our friends at Headlight Audiovisual and the Holiday Inn by the Bay, and we hope to be back in person soon and working with them once again. Finally, a very special thank you to our special community partners who support all of our chamber initiatives: Anthem, Spectrum Healthcare Partners, University of Southern Maine Community College, and MEMIC. Let's have a virtual round of applause for all of our generous sponsors. Now on to today's program with Maine's senior U.S. Senator, Susan Collins. Senator Collins is a native of Caribou, Maine, who has been working on behalf of Maine people and public service for many decades. Senator Collins was first elected to the U.S. Senate in 1996, and this past November, she won an historic re-election victory, becoming the first ever Republican woman to win a fifth term. She is also the first popularly elected U.S. Senator from Maine to be elected to a fifth term. Senator Collins is the most senior Republican woman in the U.S. Senate and serves as a senior member of the Appropriations Committee, where she oversees the allocation of $1.4 trillion in annual federal funding. She also serves on the Transportation and Housing Appropriations Subcommittee, Aging Committee, the Intelligence Committee, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. Throughout her Senate service, Senator Collins has worked with members of both parties to advance landmark legislation to improve the lives of all Americans. I've been pleased to know Senator Collins for over 25 years, and in addition to her being a hardworking and well-respected member of the U.S. Senate, she has maintained an amazing staff throughout her service in the Senate. In today's program, Senator Collins will discuss the latest developments on the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP, COVID-19 relief, rural broadband, infrastructure improvements, and workforce development. As a reminder, like other virtual Eggs and Issues programs, we will be taking questions from the audience today. Please use the chat section in YouTube, and we will do our best to convey your question to Senator Collins, time permitting. If you have any additional questions following today's program, you're welcome to send them to the chamber at chamber@portlandregion.com. Now at this time, I would like to welcome Senator Collins. Welcome, Senator Collins. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much, Jim, for your gracious introduction. And I also want to acknowledge Quincy for the great job that she does for the Portland Chamber of Commerce. She is a great source of information and putting us in touch with business leaders throughout the region. So thank you for your leadership as the volunteer president, and my thanks to Quincy for all of her hard work as well. What I thought that we would do this morning in consultation with Jim in advance is spend most of the time just in Q&A so that I can hear what's on your mind and give you the latest on the issues that you care about. Before we turn to that, let me just make very brief remarks. I know that sets off alarm bells in an institution where the filibuster was revered and I hope will be preserved. But on two issues. First, I would like to reiterate my complete commitment to bipartisanship, to working across the aisle, to trying to listen to those who have alternative views and craft legislation that I believe is in the best interest of the state of Maine and of our country. I know bipartisanship has gone out of fashion these days as our country has become increasingly polarized. And people always are asking me, what is the source of that polarization? There are many causes. Social media certainly plays a role, but from my perspective, the excessive partisanship that you see in Washington reflects the polarization in our society. There were recent surveys that showed that both Democrats and Republicans, if they are with groups who don't agree with them, are frequently hesitant to express their views on an issue. I think all of us know or have family members with whom you simply cannot discuss politics or political figures or governmental policy. And that's a real change in our country. And it's a change that worries me because it suggests a fraying of the bonds of community that have made America the great country that we are. And particularly those bonds have been strong in the state of Maine. So people say, does Washington reflect the country, or is the country reflecting Washington? And it brings to mind a story that former Connecticut Senator Lowell Weicker told me years ago. He said a constituent came up to him and said, Lowell, you and Washington are all a bunch of thieves, liars, and womanizers. To which Senator Weicker responded calmly, well, it is, after all, a representative government. So I'm not sure exactly which way whether we're the cause of polarization or reflecting polarization, but I do believe it's harmful for our country. And I have formed a group with Senator Joe Manchin, a conservative Democrat from West Virginia, of 20 senators, 10 Democrats and 10 Republicans. Joe and I head the group. And we worked together, for example, successfully in November and December to provide the framework for the $900 billion COVID relief package at a time when our leaders on both sides were simply not even talking to one another. We did so many Zoom meetings and conference calls on this that even on Thanksgiving, we were doing conference calls, much to our family's dismay. But the result is we came up with a very detailed package that prompted our leaders and the Trump administration to act. And that a very similar $900 billion package was signed into law on December 27th. And I think that would not have happened were it not for our efforts. I'll get back to that later and contrast it to the $1.9 trillion package that was just passed, since I have a feeling Jim will be asking me about that. So that is one issue I wanted to cover this morning. The only second point that I wanted to address before we start questions was the first bill that I introduced in this new Congress. And it is a bill that is, of course, bipartisan, as I believe virtually every bill I've ever introduced has been. Senator Jackie Rosen from Nevada is my co-sponsor, and it's called the American Broadband Build-Out Act. If there's anything this pandemic has taught us, it is to underscore the disparities between rural areas and more urban areas when it comes to high-speed internet service. And that has impeded areas that need it for everything from online learning to remote working to telemedicine. And the problem is that past efforts have really just rebuilt the rings that serve areas, but not gone that last mile. And I was talking to the town manager in Fort Fairfield, Maine, who said that it would cost $15,000 for someone on the outskirts of Fort Fairfield to get internet service delivered to their home. That was clearly prohibitive. And that's the kind of inequity that the pandemic has laid bare, as well as racial inequities in our healthcare system. So those are areas that I think we need to work on. And the broadband bill was my first bill for this session, $15 billion in federal grants to supplement state efforts and local internet service providers' investments. And I held the first hearing in Washington before the Aging Committee last year on the racial disparities that we were seeing with COVID infections. So with that, let me open it up to your questions, because I know that's the most interesting part of the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator, and we really appreciate your opening remarks, your hard work, and know that you've worked so hard on bipartisanship during your tenure in the Senate. So thank you so much. In fact, my first question does relate to bipartisanship, because as you noted earlier, you have worked hard to try to reach across the aisle to try to bring forward bipartisan legislation. You also noted what I think all of us have experienced increasingly over the years is that polarization, that whether it's around the dinner table with family or with friends, increasingly we are seeing polarization. So my question is, do you see opportunities in this Congress for the two parties to come together and pass legislation?
I do. For example, I think that we could craft a bipartisan infrastructure bill that I believe is going to be next on President Biden's agenda. And there's widespread support for that. Now, how to pay for it is a very difficult and unresolved issue. What exactly should it include is difficult as well. My own belief is we have to broaden our vision of infrastructure. Generally, we think of roads, bridges, seaports, and airports, and they're all very important. And goodness knows I've worked very hard to secure funding for all four of those categories. But we have to think of broadband access as part of infrastructure today. And my hope is the bill that I just described can be folded into an infrastructure package. I will say, however, that I'm disappointed with the initial attempts at bipartisanship. I know President Biden extremely well. I served with him in the Senate. We went to the Pope's funeral together in 2005. He sat next to me on the way back. We were both Irish Americans of the year, 1 year. And I like him a great deal as a person. And he has called me 4 times since my election, including a congratulatory call on my reelection just 2 days afterwards. But I am disappointed in the way the COVID bill came out. I gathered a group of 10 Republicans to go to the White House. We presented what was then a $618 billion package that took all of the president's directly related COVID provisions. In some cases took them exactly, like the $160 billion that he would allocate for vaccine manufacture and distribution and more testing. And I added provisions for healthcare providers with a set aside for our rural hospitals, which was not in his package. But we had a great discussion. In fact, we were the first group to meet with the president. I remember when we sent the letter off to the president, he called me on a Sunday. I was on my way to the Bangor airport to fly back to Washington. It was just hours after he'd received our letter. And he said, why don't you get everybody together to come to the White House on Monday? We had a very good 2-hour meeting. It was very substantive. The president was very engaged. We talked about our differences, and I left very optimistic. Then the very next day, Chuck Schumer, the majority leader of the Senate now, announced that we were going to use a process, an arcane process called reconciliation, that would jam the bill through on a majority vote and essentially cut Republicans out. That was so unfortunate. There was definitely an opportunity for compromise there. The final package that I offered on the Senate floor went up to $650 billion, which is, by the way, the amount that the Congressional Budget Office says is needed to fill the hole in our economy, is between $600 and $700 billion. And we focused on COVID relief. We didn't put in a lot of worthwhile but extraneous issues. And we kept in mind that we had passed 5 bipartisan packages last year. The latest signed into law December 27th, the latest that we helped to shape. And there are hundreds of billions of dollars in the pipeline that have yet to be spent. So I'm disappointed that that first test of bipartisanship failed, but I'm not giving up, and I hope we can do better going forward.
Thank you. In fact, that's a great lead into my next question about the $1.9 billion spending proposal, which did pass the U.S. Senate less than a week ago on a purely partisan basis. But if you had further comments about what are some of the elements of that package that may have gone too far, or other changes that you would have made. You mentioned a few of them a moment ago.
Well, let me tell you what the packages had in common. Both would have given $1,400 stimulus direct checks to adults. The difference was we tried to target it more to lower and middle income. We did get the administration to come down from its initial $300,000 figure, which I think is too high and doesn't target the assistance. It's unlikely if there's a household income of $300,000 that the individuals have been hurt financially by the pandemic in a way that they need government assistance. So that was one area of difference. As I said, the president did come down on that, but not to the level that we wanted. Both had extensions of the Paycheck Protection Program, which I wrote, and which I would argue has been the most successful economic program in helping more than 3 out of 4 small businesses in Maine. And with the additional tranche of money that was provided in December, we're now up to about $3 billion in forgivable loans to allow small businesses to survive and pay their employees, which is the whole concept behind this program. And it's been particularly important in the hospitality industry and some of our smaller nonprofits as well. Those are areas in common. We have substance abuse money in common because we've all seen overdoses go to record high. 502 people have lost their lives in the state of Maine, and Maine's not alone. We've reversed the progress we were making in the opioid epidemic, and I think that's due to the increased isolation brought about by the pandemic. Both have money for schools, but vastly differing amounts. The administration's school money, and I am a really strong proponent of safely opening our schools to in-person instruction. Maine's done well at that, but boy, cities like Chicago have done a shameful job where low-income children are falling behind. Mental health problems across the country have gone up. Parents are under tremendous stress trying to balance work and supervising their young children and helping them with online learning. There are reading disabilities that aren't being diagnosed. There are all sorts of problems, but there's already so much money in the pipeline for our schools that the estimates are that the money that is in this latest bill will not be able to be spent fully for 5 years. That is not a targeted relief. In addition, there's funding for issues that simply have nothing to do with COVID. For example, there's money for cybersecurity, very important, but not related to COVID-19, unless you're going to use it to try to reduce fraud in federal programs, including we're having a problem with fraud in the unemployment compensation program. Not Mainers, but rather organized crime, stealing the identities of Mainers and applying for benefits in their names. So there are also programs for agriculture that exclude our potato farmers and our blueberry growers in Maine for the most part. The funding for states puts Maine at a disadvantage. The formula that we had in the CARES Act was much more favorable to small states like Maine than the one that passed. And there are a lot of other wish lists that have been included in this bill, including rewriting the child tax credit. And as you know, there was an attempt to have a $15 minimum wage that was defeated. Now, the minimum wage issue did not belong in the COVID bill, but a minimum wage bill should be brought to the Senate floor. We need to increase the minimum wage. The federal minimum wage is only $7.25, clearly inadequate. And I think that's a perfect example where there could be a bipartisan compromise, and it shouldn't be $15 or nothing. There's a big stretch between $7.25 and $15. Maine's at $12.15. New Hampshire's at $7.25, by the way. And I think that we could find a compromise, phasing it in around $10 an hour, $11 an hour. And that's an example of something that should not have been in the COVID package that was knocked out with bipartisan support.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And in Portland, we now have a $15 an hour minimum wage, which is something that the Portland Chamber did not oppose, but there was also a hazard wage provision, which is currently being worked through the courts. So I think efforts in Congress to address minimum wage certainly would be welcome to bring more of a level playing field nationally in that area.
Your point is a really good one. I worry about a business that's on the New Hampshire border deciding whether to locate in Maine or New Hampshire. So I'd like to see New Hampshire be required to increase its minimum wage, though I suspect that many businesses in New Hampshire are paying above the minimum wage anyway. But it would produce more equity and help employers hire and not lose businesses to other states. But also, and most important, we need to bring up the wages in this country of people who are earning only $7.25. That's far below the poverty level. And that shouldn't be if you're working 40 hours a week.
Absolutely. Now, you did mention the Paycheck Protection Program, and you were one of the prime authors of that. That is a program that has been well used in the state of Maine. It's a program that our chamber has actively made sure that our members are aware of, taking advantage of. If you'd like to talk a little bit more about that program, what you think worked well, are there changes or modifications that with hindsight you might suggest occur going forward? I would be interested in that.
Absolutely. I served as a year as the New England administrator of the Small Business Administration in the first President Bush's administration. And so I was very familiar with the SBA programs, and I was talking with my staff that none of them was a good fit for the economic devastation that the pandemic was imposing on our small businesses, particularly those in the hospitality industry, but really across the board in many cases, and also on some of our smaller nonprofits as well. Think of local chambers who are no longer getting dues because the businesses simply can't afford that. So I worked with my staff to come up with the concept of a forgivable loan program that the SBA would work with the private sector. And thank goodness we worked through the private sector, or I think it would not have gotten off to such a quick start. And we went through the initial $650 billion in 12 days. That's how strong the demand was. And we replenished it. The concept was originally that if you use 75% of the proceeds of your loan to pay your employees, and that means sending them paychecks. So they got their health insurance, they had withholding for Social Security and Medicare, and they got any retirement benefits the business was paying. So they pay your paycheck, keep that bond, that link between employers and employees, so that once it's passed, they could reunite even if the business had been forced to close. And 25% could be used for certain overhead costs, like utilities, rent, interest on a mortgage. We changed in a subsequent bill the ratio to 60-40 because we were finding that in higher rent areas, for example, that businesses needed more help. And we also put more money into the program. Eventually, we changed it some more to allow for more nonprofits to qualify for the program, like chambers of commerce. And most important, in the December bill, we allowed funding to be used for renovations that were related to the pandemic. So, for example, if you are a restaurant who added outside seating or had to put up plexiglass shields or provide PPE for your customers and your wait staff, that would all be reimbursable. We made it more flexible. We also lowered the number of employees that could qualify from 500 in the initial bill to 300, and to try to target it more. And we made a number of additional changes like that. Most important, in the December bill, we allowed those businesses that had already received one PPP loan, but could show a revenue loss of 25%, comparing a quarter in 2019 with a quarter in 2020, which regrettably was pretty easy for a lot of our small businesses to show, to receive a second forgivable loan. Now, areas where I would improve it in hindsight is we probably should have set up a more flexible enrollment period from the beginning. And unfortunately, and over my opposition, the deadline for even the latest PPP applications is the end of this month. I would have extended it through the end of this quarter to go through June, to go to July 1st. Because there are a lot of businesses, particularly seasonal businesses, that need assistance. And the second change that we made some progress on, but unfortunately the current administration seems to be undoing, is to simplify the forgiveness process for very small businesses. I had an interesting discussion with the former Secretary of Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, and the Trump administration about the forgiveness process so that you can convert the loan to a grant. And let me say, he was great. He worked really hard to get this program working with SBA and working with our financial institutions. And a special shout out to our small community banks and to our credit unions who really stepped up to the plate. In any event, I was discussing on a Saturday with Secretary Mnuchin the 9-page application for forgiveness that was put out. And I was explaining to him how complicated it was. And he said, well, all they have to do is get the CFO to fill it out. And I said, but Steve, most of these small businesses, the owner is the CFO, is the human resources person, is the person who is cooking on the grill, is the person stocking the shelves. And I gave him the example of a woman-owned business in West Enfield that I'm very familiar with. And the woman has 3 teenagers working for her. That is her business. And the PPP loan was a lifeline to her. But the idea that she's going to have to go through this complicated process to get the conversion was ridiculous. So I convinced him on that. And then he said, well, they can hire a CPA firm, to which I replied, that costs money. So I wish that in the original law, we had set up a tiered forgiveness program that if you're a very small business and got a very small loan of under 50,000, you had a 1-page simplified assertion where you had to sign that you used the money according to the rules of the program. And you had to retain records, but essentially that would be it. And then I would have only a slightly more complicated one for loans on up to 150,000. For larger businesses, those that got the bigger loans, you could get up to a $10 million loan. I would have a more fulsome process for converting to a grant, but that's the one area where I wish we had dictated in law rather than, and we finally did in December, but rather than leaving it up to the administration. Unfortunately, this administration seems to be putting more requirements on as well. And I think they've got to look at the size of the business. And again, nobody wants to see fraud, but if you swear that you use the money appropriately and through a random audit later it's found out you didn't, you will be liable. So most businesses are using this money exactly as it was intended to be used for, to keep their employees going and to keep their small businesses afloat.
That makes sense. Sort of like when we do our tax filings, we swear that what we're submitting is true. And if for some reason later on that is not the case, there are pretty severe penalties that flow from that, and that tends to keep many people honest. So that makes sense. Also very timely, today's Portland paper talked about some of the uncertainties related to businesses trying to file their taxes and whether or not the proceeds will be taxed on the state level or not. There's uncertainties about that. In fact, the state legislature is in session today, among other things, with that issue on their plate. And in my firm, in my daytime job as a lawyer, we certainly have many clients who are asking questions about, how do I get forgiveness? When am I going to know? So I think you've certainly hit the nail on the head with some of the questions that are out there. So thank you.
Well, one of the changes that we made at the federal level in December was to make clear that PPP loans were not taxable and that you could still deduct the expenses that you normally would be able to deduct. But I know this is a very contentious issue at the State House, and goodness knows I have enough issues that are contentious at the federal level.
Thank you. So I guess maybe just to broaden the question, we've talked a little bit about small businesses, your background with the Small Business Administration. We have a COVID package with lots of components. From your standpoint, are there other aspects outside of PPP that you would focus on to try to help our small businesses in Maine and elsewhere?
There are indeed, and let me give you 3 examples. First, I think we need to pass some limited, carefully drawn liability reform to protect businesses from lawsuits resulting from COVID. I'm very worried that we're going to see a flood of lawsuits eventually, and that someone who goes into a restaurant, and even though the restaurant has followed all the health guidelines that were in existence at that time, that the customer will claim that he or she got COVID in that restaurant and sue the owner. And I think given all the uncertainty that we've had about exactly what you should do when, that we need to provide some liability protection to our businesses as long as they were not negligent, as long as they were following the guidelines. I think that's only fair. Second, and far broader and having nothing to do with COVID, as I travel all over the state and talk to employers and also talk to our community colleges and the university system, I find that there is a mismatch between the jobs that are available and the skills that people have for those jobs. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a machine shop. Doesn't matter where in Maine it is, whether it's Medway or Westbrook or anywhere in between. And I'm told, or a big business like Pratt & Whitney, for example, and I'm told they simply can't get enough machinists, enough welders, enough people who have those kinds of trade skills. And I think, and those are good jobs. They pay well, you can live wherever you want. And I think we need to do a better job of matching up the education and training that's provided with the jobs that are available. Back in the days when there used to be earmarks that you could get for federal funding, there are 2 that I got that I'm proudest of. Excuse me, both went to community colleges in Maine. One went to start a machinist program in Northern Maine at the Northern Maine Community College. They have 100% placement rate. All they needed was that initial boost to buy the equipment. The second was at the Kennebec Valley Community College, and it was to start a radiological technician program. Again, they just needed the money for that initial equipment. Now hospitals are generally paying the tuition for people to go to become trained as rad techs. And those are great examples of, in my judgment, where the federal government can play a really important role in helping to meet some specific needs and that will help our workforce have the skills that it needs. The University of Maine, I've worked very hard over the years to get funding, both for the University of Southern Maine and for the University of Maine flagship campus at Orono, on programs that they have. UNE, I was able to get funding to help them start their dental school. And that has been such an advantage to the state of Maine. So I'm also a huge fan of apprenticeship programs. I've seen how well they can work, and I think we should give to businesses apprenticeship, that we should give them tax breaks if they're willing to establish apprenticeship programs and then hire the workers who go through the apprenticeship programs. And finally, internet access is essential. Businesses make decisions in many cases on where they're going to locate, depending on whether the internet access is available. And in the pandemic, we're finding that people are willing to move to the great state of Maine to work. They want out of Manhattan and other big cities. So this is a real opportunity for us to attract businesses, and in the tech world, in all sorts of fields that otherwise wouldn't look at Maine. But to do so, we have to ensure that we have the skilled workforce and the internet access, the high-speed broadband that they need to be successful.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Certainly workforce development has been one of the top issues of our local chamber. It's been a key issue of the Maine State Chamber of Commerce as well. And finding that match is critical. I think one of the things that we've found, to the point earlier about small businesses being so understaffed, is helping businesses find the time and having the institutionalized systems in place to bring people along. In addition to money, are there other standards, requirements, programs that should go along with that level of support that you see?
Well, a program that I have long been a huge proponent of are the TRIO programs, which include Upward Bound, and they're aimed at students in Maine who don't have experience with higher education in their families. And thus the thought of going to an institution of higher education can be something that they're just not familiar with, or be even intimidating to them. And that's where the TRIO programs come in. I love these programs because they raise aspirations. They take students to college campuses, maybe their very first visit to a college campus, and they instill in them the skills and the confidence that getting additional training and education beyond high school is for them and will give them more options and a better future. We've had some problems with those programs due to the Federal Department of Education applying ridiculously strict formatting, believe it or not, requirements to the application that allowed, for example, an application from the University of Maine at Presque Isle to be thrown out because it only had 1.5 spaces in a chart rather than 2. I'm not making this up. This really was bureaucracy at its worst. And I actually had to put language in an appropriations bill to overturn that. Unfortunately, they got funded and will be able to help hundreds of students in northern Maine. But those TRIO programs exist throughout the state, and I think that they are really important as well. And often when we talk about workforce development, we don't think about that. I also am working on partnerships with local community groups to identify jobs that are in their communities and do pathways to these jobs. This is a new bill that I introduced the end of last Congress, and I'll be reintroducing shortly.
So you've on a couple of occasions talked about broadband here this morning. You've talked about it a lot during your tenure in the Senate. It's something I spend a lot of time working on and thinking about, and the state of Maine certainly has been focused on it. Over the last number of years, we keep hearing Infrastructure Week is coming. We're actually going to get to it. Everybody agrees it needs to happen. But it just needs to actually happen. Is Infrastructure Week coming, and what can we do to help make it come?
I think infrastructure is coming, but I think it's going to take a lot longer than a week to get it across the House and Senate floor. And there's a lot to be worked out. The biggest issue is how to pay for it. There'll be some who say that we shouldn't even try to pay for it. And the other issue that is complicated, as I mentioned earlier, is what does infrastructure entail? I'm very proud of the fact that Maine is #1 in receiving funding under the Federal Transportation Act, known as the BUILD Act and the BUILD program. And that's a result of my position as I was chair, now I'm ranking member of the Transportation Appropriations Subcommittee. Just to show you the difference those positions make, #2 is Rhode Island, and it was Rhode Island Senator who was my ranking Democrat on the Transportation Appropriations Subcommittee. So what we're able to do is, for example, I put in a program for rural bridges, and that has been enormously helpful to the state of Maine because we have really old bridges in this state. And whether you're talking about replacing the one in Madawaska, which is posted now and is essential to the paper mill that's the largest employer in the area, or you're looking at the Sarah Mildred Long Bridge in connecting Maine and New Hampshire, which is essential to the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, or the bridges around 295 in Freeport and Yarmouth that need replacement. I know that's going to create some traffic problems, but they do need to be replaced. Or the work I've done in Waterville, replacing an essential bridge that is helpful to the efforts of Colby College and Waterville citizens to revitalize that city, which is really exciting what's being done there. All over the state, I've worked with local officials on infrastructure needs. Perhaps one of the ones that I'm most proud of, because it's literally going to save lives, is helping the fishing community of Lubec get a new waterfront pier, and it's going to literally save lives and a breakwater for the fishermen that go out of Lubec. There's a memorial there to all the fishermen who have lost their lives, and I don't want to see another name added to that. So it's really exciting being able to help with infrastructure projects like that. Just recently in the Portland area, as the Port Authority will tell you, as Nick and others will tell you, I have worked really hard to get a replacement ferry, and we've recently gotten additional funding so that it won't have emissions. It'll be largely electric, and that's going to be making a real difference in serving the islands in Casco Bay. So that's infrastructure too, and that also is going to be good for the environment.
That's great. And a question that came in, which sort of ties together a number of pieces of this conversation about how we get the two sides to come together, how appropriate spending occurs. A number of years ago, the earmark process essentially was taken out of the process. Is there a place for that to return, to maybe help the two sides come together, maybe help pass an infrastructure package?
I think there is, but I think we have to do it carefully. There have to be rules. For example, if you're going to offer an earmark, and I'm proud of the ones I secured back when earmarks were allowed, you have to put your name on it. It can't be anonymous. Ideally, to me, it should be for a public entity, whether that's for a community, for example, helping with the revitalization of waterfronts throughout the state of Maine, as I have done, or whether it's providing some of the transportation projects or helping the University of Maine system, an education building in Farmington, the dental school at UNE. You should be, if you're going to offer an earmark, you should have your name attached to it. You should have to sign that it has no financial benefit to you personally, or to just to make sure that there's no self-dealing there. It can't be airdropped. By that I mean put in a conference report and never having gone through either the House or the Senate. So you need some guidelines, you need some rules attached, but carefully done. I think congressionally directed spending, as we like to call it, it could be part of the solution of bringing people together and building support for bills, because people would have something in it that they really care about that's going to make a difference for their constituency. You know, I've got to say, regardless of who's in the White House and who's in control of Congress, I've never understood why Congress would want to give away authority to the executive branch to make all the choices on where federal funding goes. It seems to me that's a legitimate role for Congress to play.
Well, Senator, I want to thank you again for joining us this morning. I know that you have a busy schedule later today, but we do appreciate that you were able to spend time with us. We appreciate all the work that you've done for Maine over so many years, and your command of all the issues that you work on. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim. It was great to join you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So again, as we conclude today's program, you can see a replay of today's event on our YouTube page, and all of the Chamber's events are available on the Chamber's website. We encourage you to subscribe to the Chamber's newsletter, and please be sure to follow the Chamber across all social media platforms. We look forward to seeing you again next month for our April Eggs and Issues, which will feature University of Maine System Chancellor Daniel Malloy and University of Maine President Joan Farini-Munday. In the meantime, be well, stay healthy, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.